Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of a sister from another mother. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. As most of you know, I identify as being a Black Kiwi because New Zealand is the country that I have lived in the longest. I consider New Zealand to be home. I'm a New Zealand citizen. And my next guest is coming from New Zealand. So welcome, welcome. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Suzanne Hepi tōku ingoa. He uri a hau no te rohi o Mōkai Pākehā, o Waikato Tainui, Ngāpuhi, me te kapotai hoki. My name is Suzanne Hepi. I am based in the sunny Whanganui i te taha o te awa tupua, and my age is 32. I was born and raised in the hospitality industry. My parents were both publicans, and I was very fortunate to be raised in a way that no one was able to experience, only if you were in there. I am Māori. Both of my parents are Māori, and being Māori in an industry where there's not many Māori, there were a lot of challenges. My parents were very hard workers, and they also gave me the opportunity growing up to expose me to what hard work looked like. But when it came to hard work, there were a lot of sacrifices that my parents ensured so that me and my sister could have a good life. I was born in Martin, not far from Whanganui, and my parents had the local tavern in Turakina. When I was 2 years old, I relocated to Waiouru, where I lived for 20 years as my parents purchased the hotel there. Reflecting back on those years, I was a school kid who went to the local school, but growing up at a time where education was important, my parents wanted to ensure I had a good education. I went to one open day when I had turned 12 years old at a local boarding school in Whanganui. And when I actually went there, I thought it was kind of an area, it was very foreign to me, especially coming from a place where I had been living with my parents and just attending the local school, which gave me the opportunity to walk home from school when my parents picked me up. So thinking about boarding school, it was walking into unknown, but it also gave me a lot of anxiety as I was brought up in a close whānau. Come 2004, my parents dropped me off. I went to Wanganui Collegiate Boarding School and boarded there for 5 years. Out of 500 students, there was only 10 of us that were Māori. And going into an environment like that is not a safe environment, especially for yourself as a Māori. I experienced racism. I experienced hatred towards being Māori. I didn't like learning more about what it was like to be Māori, my whakapapa. It was a really hard space to be in, and when I look at it now, I'm so proud to be Māori. Um, I have to say, from attending a very Pākehā dominated college, I did learn a lot that got me a lot to where I am today. Um, the biggest takings I got from being at a school like that was I was able to obtain NCA level 1, 2, 3 and then head on to getting university entrance. In 2009, I started attending Waikato University, and I actually was at a stage in my life where I thought I really wanted to go to university. When I look back now, it was more or less what my parents wanted me to do, but it was also the assumption of that's what happens when you go to a school like Wanganui Collegiate. You automatically go to university. There's no other pathway. So I moved to Hamilton, and during the Christmas holidays, I actually met the father to my 3 sons. So I actually fell pregnant a couple of months into university. As you can imagine, I'm an 18-year-old wahine Māori at university, and I'm pregnant. And the stereotypes behind that was that it was normal. So you weren't able to progress through with going to university and being pregnant at 18 years old and being Māori. So it was actually my parents' nightmare. They never ever, as soon as I had told them, it was pretty much, they tried to run my life, but I thought I knew better, and I also thought I knew everything at 18 years old. So I actually left my whānau during that time and went to go live with the father to my son. In April 2009, I found out my mother had stomach cancer and was terminal. So here she had been given months to live, as well as they were still processing that I was pregnant and dropping out of university. So it was actually quite a rough year. In November 2009, my mother passed. So it was also a challenge for us as a whānau, especially being Māori. You're not just raised by your parents in Te Ao Māori, you're raised by everyone in the community, all of your whānau, your grandparents, your aunties, your uncles, and your cousins. So come 2009, very hard year, and then I gave birth to my son 4 weeks after my mother's funeral, and it was a whole new experience. The journey that I learnt through losing my mother and being pregnant and being with someone who didn't really respect you as a wahine Māori was hard. The following year, things in my relationships with my son's father didn't go too well. There was a lot of domestic abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, manipulation, narcissistic traits that showed. And it was actually quite funny because people had already told me these things, but me as a person, I was a lot more ignorant that I didn't want to actually hear that these things were true, even though they had been told to me. It was actually funny that I look back now, I had to know when I had had enough. So I've moved back to my hometown of Waiuru and actually started running the pub for my parents, or my father, because my mother was gone. And that helped to build a relationship between me and my father, especially after me being pregnant and things not going too well. Once we continued on with me being in that space, in 2012, my father had sold the pub and went to go and live his retired life, or giving his time back to his people where he's from in the far north. So he's quite a business background. Fortunate to have those traits, but it was kind of a bit funny when I look at it that a piece of me is like him. My father sold the pub to the father of my children's grandparents. So in order for him to leave, they let me stay on as a manager for 6 months. So me, my oldest son, and the father to my son lived on the premises for 6 months. In 2014, I actually birthed my second son. Things in the relationship were still the same. The abuse was a little bit worse. The relationship was just a relationship, really. He still had control, physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse. And then I thought I'd get pregnant one more time in 2015 and had my youngest son. During that time, we lived locally where my mother's family were, and they actually knew all about what me and the father to my son were going through. There were times that family events, he would get into fights, or he would abuse me, or he would break something, and I always covered it up. Always covered it up. And I think going back, I didn't like to admit this, but I never wanted anyone to tell me that they told me so. And that's where I feel was my biggest problem, but it was also my biggest learning. In 2016, the relationship was the same. There was a lot of alcohol abuse coming from, especially from the father to my kids. It was kind of a substance that his family were raised in, alcohol and drugs. And it's like that's their purpose in life, to just do that. Hard worker, hard player. So in 2016, I thought I would top it off and get married. We went to Rarotonga in September that year and actually got married. It wasn't a big funeral, but it was during a time that I wasn't able to be loved physically by my mother's family, definitely emotionally. So I leant more towards being closer and hanging more out with my father's family, who were in the far north and didn't get to hear all those town gossip stories about the father to my son. And they were actually the only ones that came to the wedding. In February 2017, the relationship was just getting worse, and it was actually getting so worse that I couldn't handle it anymore. He was working during the day. I was working at night, still at the pub, raising 3 young boys. I emotionally had enough, but then I look back at it now, I had actually had enough years ago. I just didn't want to get up and leave. And I think it was the embarrassment more around people telling me what he was really like. And I think the respect that I had for myself, it wasn't really respect. And then I go back to how I felt when I lost my mother. That took a toll a lot on me wanting to have comfort in someone. That's where it kind of come into the time that I was hapu and I had someone, which was the father to my sons. And I felt that was an emotional attachment I had, where if I might not have lost my mother, I might have been a little bit more stronger. But it has been a learning curve. In February, I had decided that I was sick of the abuse. I was sick of my house being trashed. I was sick of the emotional abuse, the physical abuse. I was sick of the manipulation. I was sick of the lies. There was a lot of unfaithfulness in our relationship between both of us. A lot of lies, but a lot of we never put each other first. I tried my hardest to do that, to put him first, but it was never good enough. But now that's because a lot of trauma that happened when he was younger and what he was exposed to. And I don't blame him for what happened in his upbringing, but I blame him for not wanting to change, especially being a role model to 3 sons that we have together. I understand trauma hits hard, especially for men, And it's very apparent now that mental health abuse in young men is very common. But back then, which was only less than 20 years ago, you were seen as you would be downgraded if you showed abuse like that, or if you were vulnerable being a man. The tip of the iceberg of breaking up or leaving the father to my sons was that I had work at night. My son had a gala day, and we were waiting for him to get home so we could all go as a family. And he physically abused me, manipulated me. I had no one to watch the kids to go to work to. I attended the gala alone, and that was the tipping point after everything I had been through. And it was then that I had the mana and the kaha to leave the relationship. Once I left the relationship, I went to work, and it was actually looked at how I wanted to leave the relationship. Yes, I may have taken to a substance, so I was lucky that I was close to the father to my kids' family, that I was able to drop the kids off and organise a babysitter for them to stay there, and for me to work at the pub until I closed. It was actually that night I had realised that the relationship was, I was really out. It took a little while for me to leave the father to my kids. I moved out and got a new house for my sons. I put a protection order up on the father. I tried my hardest to get away from him, but he wouldn't take no as an answer. He stalked me. He kidnapped me. He would visit my house and see who was there, and if he found out someone was there, he would smash through the doors. There were times where my house was broken into, and that the cops were always involved because they had to take fingerprints. And that was kind of the beginning of the breakaway. I was lucky that I had a strong whānau that I was always able to look on. I was actually fortunate enough that some of my whānau were able to come and live with me to look after me, but also look after my children as I went on to be a single mother, work at the pub, and then I picked up other work at another bar, doing 1 day a week.
Wow. Susanna, you have gone through so much. There's so much to your story to unpack. So let me take you back a little bit to the experience that you had with losing your mom. Now, your mother was your anchor. She was your go-to person, right? And you found yourself without her, going through a domestic violence relationship. And a lot of women hang in there. We try and keep our families together. If you could go back and have a conversation with that young woman and give her 3 pieces of advice, what would you say to her in case there's a young woman listening to this podcast who's in the same situation? What would you have wanted somebody to say to you?
Number one, it would be, no matter what anyone else thinks, do what you want to do. And I thought too much about what everyone else would think. As I said, keeping the family together. Don't worry about keeping the family together as long as you're safe and happy. That would be my main advice. Secondly, whānau will always be there. No matter if they hate your partner or not, you're still related by blood. You can lean on them. Open yourself up. And my third part would be, don't ever be afraid to seek help from anybody. It could be a mentor. It could be a cafe owner who you're going to get a coffee with. Definitely don't ever be afraid.
That's excellent. Now, mental health and trauma exists in a lot of communities. And a lot of times it's not addressed. And I'm pretty sure this whole experience affected your own mental health. How were you coping with, say, work and just being able to function and look after your kids?
I think that went a lot into relying on a substance. I was a heavy drinker and actually a heavy smoker. Um, and that was not healthy, especially for my kids. I was fortunate to have whānau close around me that helped me look after my kids. Um, mentally, I wasn't mentally well. Never thought I was good enough due to what the father to my kids was saying. I did, um, I did have depression. I did feel like I was never able to go ahead with anything. But now that I look back at it, I feel like I was strong enough to keep going. There were times where I nearly faced death, and a lot of it was the abuse that I was faced with, but also the situations I was in. Um, yeah, substances definitely was something I relied on a lot during that time. It was like I was a bird in a cage. And once 2017 came, my cage door, there was no cage no more.
I love that. That must have been an amazing experience just having that release.
I,
So,
I, I can't explain. I still think about it now and just what that gives me. I was a very dark person before that, but it's exciting. Now, yeah. But during that time, you slowly learn a lot more about yourself.
now the Diversity Connector is trying to bring people from diverse backgrounds together in sharing our stories, understanding our lives. Tell us some of the aspects of your life as a Maori woman. What were the things that empowered you, and what were the things that limited you, do you think?
So being Māori, the things that empowered me were that we don't come in ones, we come in hundreds. My whakapapa, my whānau, and where I'm from doesn't just define me. It shows me how much mana and how much aspirations, but also the purpose of myself. My tipuna were the ones that were that experienced a lot of racism, a lot of language barriers, a lot of they weren't able to speak their own te reo Māori. And that's where it comes into the part where being Māori in non-Māori environments has actually been a very challenging space. I have to say 10, 15 years ago, it was very uncommon to see a lot of Māori in high places. But I think if we forward the time to where we are today, um, it's getting a lot more accepted, and there's quite a Māori mana movement going ahead around. I suppose an example, look at Te Pāti Māori, the Māori Party. A lot of that party, the Māori electorate have obtained those seats. So there is a movement around ensuring that Māori are at the table, policies. But where I am today, it was a lot of that movement as well as tickboxing. Um, and we don't like to be known as tick boxers. So we've got, as Māori, we have to stand truthful to the organisation we're dealing with or the people we're dealing with and ensure that we're not going to do their karakia with because we're Māori. It's their responsibility to obtain that.
Wow. So my final question for you is, we've just had the referendum here in Australia that did not go the way most of us wanted it to go. What was your reaction? What was the impact when you saw what happened here in Australia?
I was really disheartened um, to see the mana whenua of that land treated like that. And it brought me back to colonisation. How dare they do that to the First Nations people of Australia? I understand with the movement over there. It's not as fast as it is here with Māori in New Zealand, but there's always space, especially if you have the mana and the support of the people in Australia to move forward and ensure that happens, that they do get a voice at the table. It will happen. One key point I want to elaborate on is that it takes time, but never give up.
That's some word of inspiration there. Thank you so much, Susanna. I really love the fact that you have, recreated your life. You have taken back control, which a lot of women fail to do when they're in these kind of situations. What are your parting thoughts for us today?
Do things that make you happy. I have to say, the first thing I did when I split up with the fathers of my kids was I enrolled back in university. I'm about to enroll in for my PhD during this week. I graduate with my master's in 4 weeks' time, and I'm so excited. But I feel that once I failed once, and my mentality was I can't fail again, and that's what pushed me through. Kia ora.
Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. The Diversity Connector is bringing us different stories from people from all over the world. And my guest today was a real gift for me because I miss New Zealand so much. And I will hopefully come back and have a cup of coffee with you when I'm back in New Zealand in December. Susanna, thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. I'll be back again tomorrow with yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thanks, Susanna.
Ka kite.
Bye-bye. And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open, and definitely stay